Hello, and welcome to Making Creativity Pay, the podcast where we talk to people in creative industries about how they promote and market their work. I'm Dan Barnett, and on this episode I was speaking to Zoe Paskett, founder of LMAOnaise, a website, newsletter, and soon-to-be newspaper that covers some of the less mainstream areas of comedy. The ethos of this podcast has always been that even if your art may not be driven by money, without the money it's difficult to keep creating the art, and so marketing matters. And my chat with Zoe was a great example of this. Creating a print version of something when even web journalism is collapsing is an ambitious aim, and we discuss Zoe's plans for the newspaper and her work setting up and promoting the Crowdfunder, along with her experiences as a journalist for publications such as the London Evening Standard and from running her weekly newsletter for the last 3 years. I started the interview by asking Zoe to give a bit more info about herself and LMAOnaise.
So I'm Zoe Paskett. I run LMAOnaise Comedy, which is a combination of an online magazine and newsletter, which I send out weekly, and a soon-to-be print publication, a newspaper, all kind of revolving around the more alternative, queer, stranger side of live comedy in the UK.
I know you've got the Crowdfunder going until early March. What kind of made you want to kind of produce a kind of, a physical version?
A combination of things, really. I got my start in journalism in local news, and then I went on to work at the Evening Standard. So all of my kind of my staff time as a journalist was in newspapers, and I missed the physical feeling of doing that and of putting together pages and having journalism feel official in a way that it doesn't always feel when you're publishing stuff online. There's been a noticeable decrease in arts coverage and comedy coverage in general in kind of mainstream papers, which, since I've been doing it. And I wanted to find a way to kind of put that back, but in a newspaper that looked absolutely nothing like any of the newspapers that you would pick up generally, kind of, because I don't really feel aligned or attached to any of the mainstream newspapers that you could find now for various reasons. And I wanted to create something that would be completely different from them and give people a different experience of print media, basically.
So you literally start with a blank piece of paper. What was you kind of thinking about kind of how you wanted to look, both in terms of the look and feel and obviously the physical, whether you go broadsheet, mini, fanzine, those kind of things?
Mm-hmm. Well, initially, I wasn't really sure. I knew I wanted to do something print, but I was kind of going back and forth between a newspaper and a zine. And I kind of asked a lot of people about it and got a completely 50-50 response that went in neither direction and was just completely pointless. But it did tell me quite a lot about what people think about like what the different print thing represents. And for, a zine is like subversive and alternative and all these things. And a newspaper is, what your dad reads and is old and people don't really align with it. And that made me want to do a newspaper because I was like, well, how can you make something really new out of something that's already subversive and alternative? I wanted to find a way to do something weird with a newspaper in terms of like the blank page and what it will look like. I'm sort of leaning into our general aesthetic, which is mad and colourful. And as I just kind of keep saying over and over again, as different from what newspapers look like at the moment. It's quite difficult to describe because we're still in the kind of laying out phase at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of so difficult, to start something like this. You kind of think, well, how big should it be? How many do you print? And there's always, within newspaper, it's probably one of the reasons why, it's kind of declined is that, the startup costs are so high. So, if you were doing 100 or 1,000, there's kind of a negligible difference in price. Mm. But you don't know kind of, is there the demand there yet? And so you've kind of almost got to have a leap of faith, I guess, in terms of how many you want to print, how big it's going to be, and then try and build the audience from that.
Absolutely. I mean, we kind of had this dream of an idea that we would do the Crowdfunder and it would, we would get an idea of how many people wanted it from that. Everyone would pre-order it and it would be we would have like hundreds of pre-orders, but it's not that simple. And when you don't have something to show for what you've made, it's the first print, and you're still getting the word out. It's a lot more complicated than that. Yeah, we're kind of moving into like distributing it in comedy venues and that kind of thing as well now, so we can get the word out that way.
Do you almost kind of see the first issue, for one of the best phrases, kind of Lost Leader? It kind of sells the principle of it. And like you said, it's difficult for people to buy into it before they've seen it. There'll be some people who kind of know the website, know the newsletter, and kind of are on board. But then there's probably a bigger pool of people who, if they saw the physical thing, would say, yeah, I like this. But it's kind of difficult to do that, before you've even started.
Yeah, which is why we're kind of we're looking at the ways to distribute it kind of in person. I'm literally going to be in comedy venues with a sandwich board, flogging it, very kind of fringe vibes, flyering people my newspaper. But yeah, I'm hoping that the first edition won't be a kind of just a first edition, if that makes sense. Like I want it to be successful as its own thing, because there's so much work going into it, not just from me, but from people who are writing in it. I mean, it's mainly going to be the features by comedians, which they've written themselves. And then I'm writing kind of various features and interviews around those as well. But for the sake of all of those things, I want it to have as wide a range as possible, basically.
And I think, like I said to you before, this is kind of perfect for the podcast, is that, podcast is not about making the big bucks. It's, you need to do well enough on issue 1, or issue 2 to kind of keep going for issue 3, 4 and beyond. And so it's all about kind of, building that recognition, building the sales. It doesn't matter. Obviously, you want the thing to be as good as it can be, but to some extent, it doesn't matter how good the thing is if enough people don't buy it. And so, it's always that kind of difficulty. I mean, in your head, do you kind of see it as a quarterly thing?
Yeah, definitely no more regular than that. Like we can, once we've got the kind of the template and all that kind of stuff, it will be easier the second time around. But still, like the amount of stuff that goes into it for a kind of, 1 or 2 person team, it's difficult to put together, particularly when we've all got, full-time jobs as well.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Well, you've got a full-time job and the newsletter itself as well, and everything else.
Yeah.
How have you found that? Because it's a weekly newsletter. Is it, in your mind, is that good for you, that it gives you the discipline, or is there some weeks that is really, really tough?
Oh, it goes in waves. I'm in a really, really good place with it at the moment. I think also because of the newspaper, it's that in itself is incredibly motivating. But I've been doing it for 3 years now, and I've managed to carve out a day a week to write on it. So I have my allotted time, but sometimes it gets, it does get tedious. It's the same thing every week, which is why I want to do this kind of thing, like develop a newspaper to kind of get in a little bit of variety into it. But at the same time, I get such a great response from people. And sometimes, there are some weeks where you send out a newsletter by email and it goes out there and that's it. And sometimes you send it out and you get a bunch of emails back saying, oh, I really like this and I went to see this. And when that happens, it's really kind of galvanizing, because it's not just, you can't just see the stats of people reading it. You actually talk to the people who are reading it. And that's the kind of thing that makes me do it every week for 3 years, basically.
In terms of building that audience, so over the 3 years, I mean, what kind of things have you found have worked well to kind of get the word out and kind of build subscribers?
Well, I've got a lot better at social media. Weirdly, since I deleted Twitter, which I do have some regrets about now that I'm doing a crowdfunder. But in general, deleting Twitter made me put so much more effort into Instagram. And for me, I feel like that's where kind of comedy lives a lot more now, particularly the kind of thing that I'm interested in promoting, like the kind of more weird and kind of character clowny stuff that's much more kind of that works a lot better with a visual medium. But yeah, kind of interacting with people a lot more on social media and doing kind of collaborations, having people write for me, and developing the website more outside of the newsletter has changed things a lot, particularly in terms of engaging with people's like particular fan bases rather than just my subscriber list.
It seems interesting that, things are going much more from, full on blast on social media to much more smaller groups, whether that's newsletters, Discord, or even back to forums and things like that. It seems that, people are kind of tired a bit of just having everything bombarded at them. They want more quality and more interaction with the things they like.
Yeah, I think that particularly with comedy as well, because there's so much of it, and finding out information about comedy is, if you don't already know what you're looking for, it can be like ridiculously overwhelming. Like it just going, if you want to go to a show or you want to find out about a new person or whatever, it's all you can Google, but it's so difficult if you don't already have an in. So kind of curating lists and recommendations and that kind of thing. That was sort of the goal, really, to make it a little bit easier for people to sort through everything that is out there and everything that is disorganized, to find new things that they might be interested in if they didn't already know what they wanted. So these sites do exist. There are plenty of other comedy sites, but I feel like focusing more on the alternative side of things, it's harder to find if you want to enter into that world and you don't know where to start.
How have you found working with, I think you said you've got a variety of comedians working on it? Do you kind of find that they're kind of good at explaining what they do? Because it's always difficult to kind of say, to kind of, it's always this kind of thing. It's a different writing about comedy and kind of what they do and what they like and why people should visit. I mean, do you find that some are a lot better than others than kind of really getting their message across?
I mean, definitely, yeah. But it all depends on what their style is, I guess. A way that I've found around that, which is what we're doing for the paper, is I've kind of put a moratorium on saying, this is what my show's about, please come to my show. Because I don't think, if that's what you want, then you can go and look at their social media. What they're writing about is just something, it's just a topic either that is related to what's in their show, that gives a reader an idea of what's in there, and what they're going to see, or something that's completely unrelated to their show, but is very much within the vibe of their comedy or their personality. So they're selling what they do rather than a specific show that you're going to go and see, which then makes the articles a lot more interesting, because, they're writing absolutely crazy batshit stuff that is just, that I could never have thought up or commissioned. So I like to give people complete free rein on topic to do anything. And that's those are the ones that do best. Over the Fringe, we had a really great piece by Sophie Zucker, who's an incredible American comedian, whose show is kind of a musical show about other things, but also about dating your cousin. And she wrote a piece about 5 reasons why everybody should date their cousin at least once. And she didn't talk about her comedy at all, but it gave like a perfect insight into what her vibe is and what the show is, but without being explicit about it. And those are the things that always do really well.
Mentioning the Fringe, I know you took you took a physical. I mean, was that more of a zine type thing that you took to the Fringe? And was that a kind of, in your mind, a kind of a testing ground, or did you kind of think of it as a one-off at the time?
So the magazine was actually wasn't an LMAOnaise thing. That was a separate magazine that I did with two amazing producers called Georgia House, who's helping me with the newspaper. She's doing the design for that, and Allegra Rosenberg. And that was that was part of what made me feel like I could do this newspaper. The newspaper wasn't really even on the horizon at that point. But yeah, we wanted to do a free magazine, which kind of highlighted a lot of the shows that didn't necessarily get all of the big coverage from a kind of teen mag perspective. And that was great. And it was really, really successful. And it went down incredibly well over the Fringe. And we pulled it together way too fast beforehand. It was just so stressful. I arrived at in Edinburgh and I was immediately ill, like before it had even begun. People start getting ill a couple of weeks in, but no. But it was great, and it wasn't so much a testing ground, but it definitely made me feel like it was possible to do that kind of thing independently without a massive team behind you.
In your head, are you kind of thinking if the newspaper goes well, one of them will coincide with August and Edinburgh? I
think we'll probably do the Fringe beat, the teen mag again for Edinburgh. I think timeline, well, I'll put out this newspaper and then we're almost immediately getting started on the Fringe magazine. And then I'll maybe, give myself a weekend when I get back before I start on this again.
Okay. And kind of what are your thoughts on the Fringe in general? Kind of spoke to performers, newspaper critics and things like that about kind of the good and the bad. Some people have said, it's their favorite place in the world. That August, it's absolutely fantastic. But there's obviously all the downsides as well. I mean, what are your kind of takes on kind of where it is and where it's going?
I mean, I think I probably have a very similar feeling to a lot of people about it. I love it. I think there's nothing, I know there's nothing like it. And being there is completely unique. I've seen the most incredible stuff there that just wouldn't be possible in London or, wherever you live. But at the same time, there's always a period in the run up to it where I'm like, why am I doing this? Why are we all doing this? Can't we just start the entire thing over somewhere else and begin it again from how it used to be, where it was about experimenting and didn't cost £1 million and didn't, make everybody ill. So it's a real balance between those two thoughts. But I always, every time I get there, I come back and I'm like, you couldn't do this anywhere else. It's great. I love it. But I always come back with feelings of various magnitudes about stuff. And my main thing this time was about the lack of care for artists, which I felt really strongly because a lot of my friends who were performing, mainly queer performers, had really bad experiences, partly with audiences or partly with venue staff or people in foyers afterwards, and were at the end of a lot of abuse from people. And it seemed like there wasn't a consideration of how that should be handled in general by the Fringe. I know it's like a big unwieldy thing now. You can't monitor absolutely everything that's going on across the whole Fringe in all venues, but I really felt like more needed to be done by Fringe Society in terms of how preventing that kind of thing from happening in the first place. And I did give them a piece of my mind about it on the feedback form afterwards.
And in terms of obviously you've had a live show in the past. Would you consider putting on a mixed bill or something up at Edinburgh?
Oh yeah, definitely. I have to say my involvement in that was so minimal. It's really not my area of expertise. And the fact that I work with comedians and producers means that I'm off the hook a little bit in terms of organising that sort of thing. But with our first and only LMAOnaise night, that was pretty much managed by Maddie Bai, who's an amazing producer and comedian, and she works for Impatient now, and she's been producing Julia Masley's tour, which obviously has been hugely successful. I absolutely loved it, but I really felt like I was sort of a little apprentice, just kind of tagging along behind Maddie while she did all of the big girl stuff. But I would absolutely love to do that kind of thing again, because we did it in lockdown, a time when you could go into work, but you couldn't go out anywhere. So we filmed it in the Clapham Grand and like streamed it live, but without an audience. And it was so weird. And I would love to just be able to hear people laugh at the show rather than, being one of like 2 people sitting there watching it and having to do the work of like 100 strong audience with my laughter.
And yeah, without wanting to add even more work to your load, I mean, have you thought about podcasting?
I have. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, if it exists, I've thought about it. If this was my full-time thing, I would do it all. It's literally just a time thing. I was talking a little while back with Michael Jewlings, who he does all of the design for the website, and he runs Pinata, which is an amazing alternative comedy night, very successful. And we were talking about doing a podcast that focused around mixed bill comedy nights, because often, they don't get reviewed and they don't get any kind of attention after it's over. And there's never really any evidence of those happening. So at some point, I'm just putting it out there with my copyright stamp on it. I would like to do that. I'd like to just kind of be able to give a bit more attention to those kinds of like live nights that basically prop up live comedy. Like it's not about solo shows and tours. The majority of stuff happens on those mixed bill nights, and I think they deserve a bit more love. Yeah.
So circling back to the newsletter, I mean, kind of how's it been received so far? What kind of feedback have you had, and levels of interest and so on?
It's been great. It's all kind of operating under the niche that it exists in, which is that it's alternative comedy and like weird stuff. So when at points at which the subscriber numbers plateau a bit, I have to remind myself that I'm not talking about like big name comedians and tour shows and that kind of thing. It's very niche, but within that, I think for that reason, it's kind of created a really lovely reciprocal community, where a lot of the time I'll put work out and put newsletters out and get a lot back from people, because it feels more intimate, I guess, because we're talking about smaller shows and newer comedians and things that feel in the room a lot more intimate. So I think it kind of appeals to people who like that kind of comedy. And I think the ethos behind it has been really a kind of combination of beneficial and kind of limiting, but in a positive way, in that I set some ground rules about what I will and won't write about. And that's kind of created quite clear boundaries around who will enjoy it and who won't. For example, I never recommend anything that's only got white people on the lineup. And I've been very clear about that. It's on the website. And another thing that I haven't like made explicit, but is my personal rule, is never having lineups that just have one woman on them, because that feels icky. So having those kind of boundaries, my goal is to be inclusive, but I am aware that is also, it does exclude certain things, which I don't have a problem with. But it does mean that like it does limit the amount, like the type of person that will be interested in it to the type of people that I want to be interested in it. Yeah. Which is, if
you try and please everyone, you'll please no one. So exactly. Yeah, and in terms of the content, I mean, are you looking at advertising or things like that within the newspaper to try and help make it pay its way?
Yes. Yeah, I am. I'm being quite targeted with that for the same reasons I've just spoken about. I think it's partly why I haven't really set aside the time to do it properly for the newsletter yet. is that I really want to be like fully aligned with any kind of sponsorship that I get. I don't just want to open the door to just, if you pay for it, then you get it. Because that goes against all of my house rules.
Don't need to talk about actual numbers, but when you're kind of pitching to someone to say you're going to advertise, how do you kind of set a number in your head? It's such difficult, because they will say probably, well, how much do you want? And you'll probably say, well, how much will you pay us? And it's kind of difficult to have a kind of, this is the rate card for something that doesn't yet exist.
Yeah, it's really hard. I'm opening it as a conversation rather than presenting it as a set thing, because I don't have the privilege of being steadfast with that. Like I do kind of have to take what I can get, really. If it's something that I really believe in, then I'm happy to have that kind of negotiation. But it's also my first time doing any of this. So I think who knows whether or not I'm approaching it in the right way at all. I think I'm probably being a little bit too like, oh, well, maybe if you want to, you could do this. Or if you don't, then never mind. No worries if not, kind of thing. But yeah, I'm, trying it out, see what happens.
And in terms of logistics, obviously the Crowdfunder closes middle of March. And I think on the website, you talk about people receiving it in April. So obviously that's quite a timeline. So are you kind of a long way down the road already? So you've kind of in your mind, it's 16 pages, 32 pages, whatever it would be, the kind of format.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have in your mind yet kind of how many you're going to print, and when do you need to kind of have that locked in?
So we've got a kind of sliding scale of, depending on how much money we get in, this is how many we print. So we've mapped out the different options for that. In terms of of timelines, the timelines don't really change based on that. We've just trying to get as much as possible done before March, basically, which I realize is now not long. But one of the good things about having worked in newspapers before is that it is different. It's a different thing from magazines in that every page is individually designed and beautiful, and you have to really carefully go into different fonts and headers and all of this kind of stuff. With newspapers, it's a lot easier to have a layout and then drop everything into it and then design around that. But to be able to have that in place beforehand makes those tight timelines a lot more manageable. It's mainly the main timeline thing is making sure that all of the comedians who promised to write have actually written. And I was a little bit worried a couple of weeks ago, but it's rolling in now. But you kind of have to rely very, very heavily on other people's time management and just kind of send friendly reminders. But
if you could go back a couple of months and kind of start again, are there any kind of things you'd have done differently? Are there things you've already learned that, well, that quite wasn't right? For issue 2, we'll do X, Y, and Z differently.
I think giving yourself more time to do anything is always a good thing. I really, really felt like I was giving us a good runtime starting in January, but it still feels tight. I think regardless of anything, just kind of putting together anything like editorial is so dependent on other people that it's really difficult to map out how long these things take. So I would always give myself more time in hindsight. But I think, touch wood, it's all going quite well so far, said with a question mark at the end. But it's tricky when I'm still in the midst of it to know. I think maybe once we get out the other end, I'll have more of an idea about every little thing that we did wrong. Yeah, we could do next time. Yeah.
Talking about economies of scale, are there any kind of sister publications that you possibly consider partnering with? So, if you've got 16 pages and someone else has got 16 pages, you have a 32-page combined newspaper. So, you could print more for pretty much the same cost. I mean, are there any kind of publications that you'd kind of think, yeah, these fit in, not necessarily in comedy, but the general vibe is kind of similar?
I mean, that's a great idea. And I haven't thought about it. It hasn't actually crossed my mind, but oh God, I don't know. I'm not sure, because I think like the reason for setting up was very much like there isn't anything like this. So it's hard to know what else I might want to partner with, but that's something to think about.
Yeah, because I mean, some we've had on the previous guests, they work Drowning Sound, kind of done music stuff. They've got forums and all that kind of stuff, and I think Sean, who runs it, is kind of thinking about getting into print. So not necessarily them, but if there were try and say it right, LMAOs. LMAOnaise. There we go.
Yeah.
LMAOnaise for music or for fashion or for book. Whatever, those kind of things. There's probably people doing similar things or want to do similar things in slightly adjacent, who have the same kind of philosophy and ethics that you do.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that, and I would love to know what those were in those other areas, because I do feel very I feel like I used to know a lot more about culture in general, and now I've just kind of really specified my knowledge into comedy in quite a big way. But I guess, I mean, having thought about it a little bit more over the last 30 seconds, I think, and there are plenty of amazing queer publications out there that I think would be a really fun thing to align with, like, and lots of, like queer Instagram accounts that have followings of people who just want to know more about what's going on. And there's one called Hey Queer London, which is really good, and I subscribe to that. And like, I think that's probably, if I could pick an area, that's probably would be a good direction to go into, because the most engaged corner of the LMAOnaise fan base is the gays.
And I mean, do you find it very London centric?
I do, yeah, and I am fully aware of how London centric LMAOnaise is. Like, I'm trying to make it more kind of a bit more wide ranging, but living in London, it's really difficult to do that. Like, that's where my knowledge is, and I can only find out so much without spending a lot of time in different comedy scenes, which I'm unfortunately not able to do. The goal for that is to be able to bring in other writers, particularly like reviewers who live in different areas of the UK. I'd really like to get more into Scotland and more into Manchester and around there, because I know that Manchester has an amazing comedy scene that I don't really know very much about and can't easily get to. But that's kind of the next big goal, apart from the newspaper, is to widen the team a little bit and to make it, because I don't want this to be a one-person passion project. I want it to be a kind of legitimate site with lots of different opinions and different viewpoints, because I'm also fully aware that I'm a white middle-class woman, and that informs where I'm coming from. As much as I complain about all of the straight white male reviewers, I have to acknowledge that that's what my perspective is. And if I want to widen that, then I need to bring in other people who have different backgrounds. And that includes, like extending outside of London.
Are you getting involved at all with the Glasgow Comedy Festival? It's coming up.
I mean, I'm not going, sadly. But I am telling other people to go. And I mean, that's, at the moment, that's about as much as I can do for shows that I don't go to, is kind of try and bring as much attention to them as I can. But I would love, I'd love to be able to engage more with that kind of thing, with Glasgow and like other fringe festivals, in the same way that we do with Edinburgh Fringe. Because it doesn't sit well with me that there's just like that one kind of central nucleus, when there are so many other fringe festivals around, like Leicester and Brighton and Buxton and Macfest and all of these other ones.
No, that's fantastic. I don't know if you finished, just to kind of, if you wanted to give a quick little plug for the crowdfunder, kind of what it is. Yeah, we've kind of talked about it, but a bit more kind of what people can get from it, and kind of your aims for it.
Yeah. So we're crowdfunding to create a first ever LMAOnaise comedy newspaper, which is going to be filled with features by comedians about completely ridiculous topics, as well as the kind of usual LMAOnaise stuff, which is a lot of recommendations of shows to see, features interviews and features about other festivals and things going on around the country. You can get one for £5, which includes postage to your house, or we have plenty of other tiers of rewards. Sadly, the kind of middle ones have sold out now, but you can get badges and limited artwork. The amazing comedian Luke Rollison is making some unique and incredibly weird collages. We want to get the word out as much as possible. So the £5 tier is my favorite one. I just want everybody to share it and to get involved with the print side of new media.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Zoe. There's more details in the show notes about where you can find more information about the Crowdfunder and LMAOnaise in general. If you enjoyed this, check out some of our previous episodes where we speak to people about making creativity pay.